Hello, everybody. I am Zenith will rule, and welcome to the one and only Disney Debate podcast, where Kat Mac, Y2 Staller, and I discuss and debate the Disney. Another word that starts with D. This is all about Disney products, Disney films, and other stuff related to Disney. Disney demolition. No, wait.
That could be a thing.
Today, that could be a thing. Today, we are once again continuing with our Shaggy Dog marathon that we started a little while ago. We are in the third episode of this marathon out of 4 films, and so yeah, we're over halfway, which is pretty nice. I mean, we had a little bit of a hiccup, but I'm pretty happy that we've covered the majority of these films thus far. But before we get into this film today, how's it going, Kat?
It's going good, I guess. I'm sorry. I'm still suffering a bit from, lack of Shaggy Dog amazement. I'm dealing with kind of a bit of a disappointment residue, if you will, because, man, this movie was a letdown. I blame the Shaggy DA. It built my hopes up too much. I was expecting more zaniness, and this just didn't deliver. I'm sad.
All right, and Eric, how are you today on this fine evening?
I'm with Kat on this. I'm kind of bummed out about the return of the Shaggy Dog, how that didn't really pan out as well as we thought it was going to be. Yes, it's made for TV film, but they still could have done zany stuff. At the end of it, I was kind of like Peter Griffin in that episode of Family Guy where he was watching a Chekhov play and he goes, "What the hell is this? For God's sake, somebody throw a pie!"
Pretty much.
This film, the film that we're talking about today, is The Return of the Shaggy Dog. And this is yet another reason why I'm really glad that we didn't just lump everything together, because we've had 2 really good films. Well, we had one okay film that got really, really great at the end, and then we had the Shaggy DA, which was really, really awesome. And then we have The Return of the Shaggy Dog, which is like the complete opposite. It is nearly all bad, and we're going to get into it in a little bit, but I think this is a really big reason why I'm glad I decided to say, okay, let's do individual podcasts for each thing, because I think we do have a lot to discuss with how out there this film is, how it differed from the other films, and just in general, the failings of this one film. But before we do that, Eric, would you please explain, using charts, when this film takes place?
Okay, so here's the Shaggy Dog, which takes place in the 1950s. And now we have the Shaggy DA, which takes place in the 1970s. Somewhere along here in this timeline, the Return of the Shaggy Dog breaks off into an alternate timeline that takes place in the 1980s. So we have Return of the Shaggy Dog here, the Shaggy Dog is here, and somehow there's a chalkboard in the middle of my apartment. And I don't even know where the 90s remake fits in because I'm still trying to get my head wrapped around all this. So it's crazy. It's a time paradox, I tell you. Back to you.
Yeah, this is a bit of a weird film because supposedly it takes place in between the Shaggy Dog and the Shaggy DA. However, whereas you could clearly tell that the Shaggy DA was a sequel, like a direct sequel to the Shaggy Dog, despite some retcons, here it's not so obvious, because if you look at the time period this was being filmed in, it is very 80s, However, it doesn't try to hide the fact that it's 80s, and that's really one of the big problems. If you're going to make it an interquel, you really should have, try to tone down the 80s atmosphere. Kat, before we go any further, why don't you give a brief summary of this film, and we can talk about how much of a letdown and how out there this film is.
Gladly. So yeah, like you said, this is a midquel. It actually takes place about 17 years after the original Shaggy Dog. So we're looking at about, I want to say about 1966, and everything looks like it's 1987 for some reason. Well, anyway, at this point, Wilby Daniels has become a lawyer, as we already knew he would, and at this point, he has only become engaged to his girlfriend Betty, who we saw in the Shaggy DA. And as they're getting ready to, get married and start their new life together, at the same time, Professor Plumcut, the museum curator from the first movie, is dying. And with his last words, he actually leaves the Borgia ring over to Wilby, which, makes sense. Unfortunately, rather than, tell this to a lawyer or somebody with, credibility who can enforce it in the legal means, he tells it to his two servants, who are actually crooks, and have been waiting for him to die so that they could sell all his stuff and move to some foreign country. And, of course, they get their hands on the ring, and, of course, read the inscription, and then we go through all that shit again. So, yeah. Now, poor Wilby has to track down the ring, break the curse, so he can tell his fiancée without actually telling her what's going on. Oh, yeah, and Moochie's in this.
The big difference is that they retcon the ring once again, because it's not a curse anymore. It's like, in the first film, it was a curse that had to be broken by him saving someone. In the Shaggy DA, it was just, okay, it's a time limit, and when that time limit is up, he turned back into a dog. Except when you say it too much, you become a dog yourself, which didn't make sense. Here, it's changed again, and it's odd, to say the least, because instead of having a time limit, they only change back when they say the incantation a second time.
Yeah, I don't get the curseness of this ring. Does it change like every decade or something? Does it get bored with itself? What is going on?
Maybe the Borgias are playing a cruel prank on everybody. I don't know. The ghost of the Borgias. I don't know. It would be nice to have some consistency with this.
Are we sure this was really the Borgias? Are you sure this wasn't like, some prank made by some ancient civilization? Like, oh, this is gonna be so funny, Bob. Like, we're gonna keep changing it. This isn't really a ring of transmutation. It's gonna change like every so often. It's gonna be so hilarious.
It's at this point, I'm just gonna accept that the ring is just random and does whatever the fuck it wants, and it just likes giving Wilby a hard time, because man, does Wilby go through some shit in this. I mean, granted, not as bad as he did in Shaggy DA, but still, he goes through some shit.
But at the same time, not a lot happens in this film. All right, let me summarize what this film is about in 5 seconds. There are some con men. They say the incantation on the ring, and hijinks ensue because for some reason Wilby's soon-to-be wife, his fiancée, thinks that he's sleeping with this other woman, and this other woman thinks that his fiancée is sleeping with a dog. It's like there's all these misunderstandings, but the problem is these are misunderstandings in the lamest possible way, where like nobody should be able to really misunderstand things this bad. And that's the entire film. There's not really a lot of antics with the dog. There's not really a lot of stuff like big plot heavy stuff like the last two films. Hell, the first film had more plot than this one did.
Not necessarily a very good plot, but
At least it was more entertaining. With this, it was like, let's go from point A to point B and back to point A again. Like, I can't even fully remember, like, all the places that they went to in this movie. It's like, they just kind of bounced back and forth between 3 different sets, and it was like, it's like, okay, we're going to do this, and now we're going to do this, and now we're going to do this, and wow, there's no consequences or stakes in any of this. Okay.
then again, I should have expected from a made-for-TV budget. I mean, with a theatrical film, you have a bigger budget, but since it's made for TV. But at the same time, even with a made-for-TV budget, you could still do some slapstick here and there. I mean, there was sort of, I guess. I mean, that kind of ties in with the Moochie side plot, which we'll get to in a minute. But I mean, they could have done a little bit more.
I was gonna say, at times I felt like I was like watching an episode of like Step by Step, or like Full House, or what Family Matters, or one of those weird like 80s comedies where, you know, it's so formulaic that you know exactly what's coming and exactly how they're gonna execute it. And yeah, that's this movie all over. It's a 80s sitcom episode just stretched to 90 minutes.
Except for the wacky neighbor part, because like that was what was missing. At least those sitcoms had like a wacky neighbor at some point. At least some of those shows did. But here it's like, meh. There's just, this is what you get.
The real thing that I see with this is that it's so set with its cliches, and it never really goes with any of its jokes. Like, it tries to put forth like these things happening, but it ends up feeling like one of those straight to DVD Beethoven films where like there's another random villain, and so we have these antics, except 95% of the film nothing happens. And it's like you have this villain, admittedly not the best villains, but one of them is played by Mama Cosma. So you would think you would think that given a name like this, someone with this interesting voice, you'd be able to do something, but they make them rock stupid. Like, her henchman is just completely dumb, and she really doesn't do anything. Like, all they really try to do is sell off the stuff. And there's this one scene that is so infuriating. So, her assistant has a book.
His name is Carl.
Carl, that kills people. But yeah, Carl is reading a book of Latin, trying to understand what the phrase on the ring means. And I don't know any Latin myself, aside from like maybe common phrases that everyone knows. But I can tell you what in canis, what is the actual phrase?
In canis corpore transmuto.
I can tell you just by listening to that phrase, you're becoming a dog. Because canis, canine, like, we have Latin root words for a reason, guys. But he's reading them, each word individually, translating them painfully slow. And after reading them, he's like, I wonder what that means. You just translated them.
I know, for fuck's sake, Wilby was like a teenager in high school, and even he could understand what the words were before this dumbass could. And that was without the aid of a translation book. Like, dear God. And the best part is, even after he says the words, and of course, the professor has a pet Shaggy dog, and the dog disappears on them, he's like, oh, he must have ran away. Like, motherfucker, you saw him disappear. Like, dear God.
I think what's worse about this is how much they drag this joke on about how, like, oh, he can't figure this out, but it just goes on for way too long. And it drags itself, and it's painful to watch.
It's one of those Family Guy gags where the joke goes on for way longer than it should, where maybe you got a chuckle in the first little bit, but 3 minutes later, you're like, is this over? And then 5 minutes later, you're like, end. It wasn't that funny in the first place. Just stop. And that is one of the crux problems of this film. The villains are... It's a dumb plot. It is... The only way this film works is if everyone in this film is an idiot, and especially the villains are idiots, and they barely do anything, so the film ends up feeling hollow.
Yeah, like, let me give you the process of, like, the villains throughout this. So for the first half, they, after the professor dies, they start gathering up his things, figuring out what would sell the most. They look for the ring, they find it, they say the incantation, then they try to pawn it. They can't. Once again, people don't realize how valuable the Borgia rings are. I don't know why. And then then they find out that it actually, they find out about Wilby, they find out about his condition and what the ring can do, so they leap to the conclusion, ooh, let's turn him into a talking dog. That'll sell for big money. And I'm like, are we back in the Shaggy DA again? Or are we going to do this bit again? But then when they do turn him into a dog, they tie him up, and instead they ransom him. They hold him for ransom and get the woman that he was working with before to pay his ransom, so they could, run off to some foreign country and basically do what they were going to do at the beginning. And then they actually meet up with her in person without disguises at the place where they are committing said crime. And then when she double crosses them, they kidnap Wilby's fiance and go on this big ass car chase, where they inevitably crash into the police. So yeah, these are our villains. These are our villains. Like, we went from Keenan Wynn, who, was a master, like, lying politician who almost freaking killed Wilby and would have done it discreetly at that, to these two bumbling assholes who can't even get their own plan straight. So, yeah. That's you can see why I'm disappointed in this film. And that's only the tip of the iceberg.
It's so damn frustrating, because what this idea, what these plots could, what this concept is capable of. We have seen good things.
Silly things. But good things. I want to take a step back for a second, because I want to explain a little bit about the side plot that's also going on with Moochie. Because in this film, Moochie's an adult, and in the beginning, we see him in Wilby's office, and he's been using the office as a casting office to try to find a dog for a dog food commercial that they are trying to film. So when Wilby turns into the Shaggy Dog, he's like, oh no, it's happening again. But then he's like, wait a minute, I got it. I know, I could use you for the dog food commercial. It'll be brilliant. So it kind of almost like resembles Tim from the Shaggy DA, where like he's like, we're gonna sing, and you could speak, like we'll tour the country, we'll make millions. And this is kind of like that, but only this is more like, oh, we're gonna use you for this dog food commercial, like please just help me out for this one thing. And Wilby kind of sort of goes with it, not really, but and that kind of leads into the only real decent part of the film, where when they go to the shoot, Wilby does like all this stuff. Like at one point he's playing the peanut shell game with people in a picnic bench, and then he's cutting, and then he's like doing cooking, and then he's like, then he's doing
Karate
kung
chopping a
fu. He's
board
like
in half.
karate. Yeah, he's karate chopping a board in half. I mean, that stuff was silly, but I'm sitting there going, like, where was this throughout this movie? Like, they could have done more with this. I mean, sure, I mean, not to the extent of, like, the Shaggy DA, but at least something.
Well, the disappointing thing, even with that scene, is that they don't play up the reactions to that going on, because part of what made the first two so great was seeing the dog do these ridiculous things that a dog cannot do and seeing how people reacted to it. In this one, when the dog starts doing all this insane shit that you know a dog is not physically capable of doing, everybody just smiles and acts amused and does not question it in the slightest. Heck, even toward the climax, when we have the inevitable car chase again, nobody bats an eyelash at this dog that is driving a car. They're just like, "Huh, a dog driving a car. I'll be." It's like, no, does nobody teach you how to do comedy? Does nobody know how to react to an absurd situation? What is this?
And
Actually,
it's strange how they're able to make a plot point that was the crux of the first film not funny.
Yeah, that's kind of an understatement. Like, because there were good opportunities for comedy and stuff. Like, there actually was one scene that I thought was kind of funny, and it was when Wilby's fiance and the woman that he was working the dog commercial for confront each other. Because there's the whole big thing, of course, is your basic misunderstanding where Wilby, of course, gets dragged into the dog commercial thing by his brother, who ends up giving him to, like, this talent agent, and she thinks that he's an abandoned dog, so she takes him home with her. And through a series of, run-ins and everything, his fiance finds him coming and going from her house, leaps to the conclusion that he's cheating on her. So eventually she ends up confronting the agent, and it's a whole comedy of errors type thing where they each say, like, lines that can be interpreted one way or another. So while she's talking about Wilby and how much she loves Wilby and how the agent doesn't deserve him, the agent, of course, thinks that she's talking about the dog. And it's all like, and she's all like, I'm getting married to him, and you'll never love him the way I do. And it just spirals from there, and it honestly could have worked if the dialogue was better written. Because that's the only time where, like, somebody actually reacts oddly to an insane situation. Because the agent's, like, looking at her like, "Huh, you're getting married, huh? Have you talked to anybody about this?" Like, and then when she leaves, she's like, "Poor girl." I'm like, okay, that was funny. That they could have done more with that, because they could have done something along the lines of The Importance of Being Earnest, or Comedy of Tenors, that route, but it's only for that one scene, and I was a little disappointed because, yeah, having a woman talk passionately how much she loves a dog and how she's gonna marry a dog, that could be funny. And they did absolutely nothing else with it afterwards, so sadness.
It is really a crying shame, because they have all the elements there for a good film, but they never really do much with it. And there's another subplot with they have to get ready for the wedding, and Wilby, as a dog, goes to her wedding, but he never talks to her or, like, does anything. Like, there's a setup for things going down at a wedding where you can do things, and then there's the chase scene, which is okay, and it goes and ends up in the wedding, but nobody freaks out that there's a bunch of cars driving through the wedding and people are getting arrested. And even the cops aren't really, like, surprised at what's going on. They just arrest the people, read them their rights, and go away. Like, if you're going to play it straight, then there has to be something absurd going on. We saw, me and Kat, we saw Airplane the other day, and here is the big difference between Return of the Shaggy Dog and Airplane. They had serious actors act 100% serious with their lines. They were committed to everything that they performed, but the things they were saying and the situation was so absurd that it got a laugh. Here, it doesn't work because they're either not committed to what they're doing or the situation is just too normal for us to really get along, go along with it.
At the same time, they try to insert 80s comedy where they have the typical goofy characters playing up their quirks and whatnot, and it clashes so much. What was it, Moochie? Moochie's the pinnacle character of this, because he basically plays the role that Tim Conway did in the Shaggy DA. He's meant to be the comic relief, but he's supposed to be the bumbling fool and all that, and all the comedy's supposed to come from his his misjudgments and error and everything. There's this one scene that, oh god, it made me cringe so hard and made me basically face palm myself into oblivion. And it was later on, right before the climax, where he's trying to help Wilby find the ring at the professor's house, and he comes across the professor's dog that Wilby keeps changing into, and he thinks that it's Wilby, so he's like, oh hey, not again, well, let's get you out of here. And he just stops looking for the ring, and he takes the dog and brings the dog to the wedding rehearsal. And then he's just like, okay, we're here. Now, Wilby, I want you to stop being a dog. You can do it. It's all through suggestion. It's all through sheer force of will. Come on, Wilby, you can do it. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on? Are you kidding me? This was your plan? And then and then it becomes awkward because he has the dog in front of Wilby's family and his future in-laws and Betty, and she's getting all upset, and he's like, come on, Wilby, come on, you can do this. Okay, now you're being a dick, Wilby, come on. Oh, that's it, Wilby, I'm not talking anymore. And I'm like, what the fuck? You are a dumbass, and you are not a funny dumbass. You are just a dumbass. Screw you, Moochie. You are dumbass.
They managed to take the worst part of the Shaggy DA and make it almost the crux of this film, and that really feels what this film is. It's almost like it's almost like they condensed the worst parts of the other two films together to create this one film, and it's sometimes really painful to watch, and it drags on very, very long. I kept looking at my watch.
Yeah, I was getting so antsy throughout the film, and by the time we got to the climax, I'm like, just end already, please. Even the car chase scene was like, okay, this chase scene sucks. Can we end it? Can we end it now? End it, please.
They're just going around in circles, literally in the car chase. They're going around in circles, but it just it drags on and on and on. I remember when I was watching it with you, Kat, and I'm just like, how much time is there left? I'm like, 20 minutes. Oh.
Yeah. I won't lie. It was hard watching it twice, just because I'm like, nothing's happening. Well, maybe it'll go faster the second time. Nothing is still happening.
It was an hour and a half movie. It was an hour and a half movie, but it felt like 3 hours.
Yeah, it is one of those films that just goes on, and unfortunately, it doesn't just end like the Shaggy DA. It has to have 3 different things happening for the climax and stuff like that, and it just ends up being annoying in the end. I'm so glad I didn't have to watch this a second time. This is the difference between the Shaggy DA, which makes comedy work despite being dated. It is still very, very enjoyable, and it really holds up in many respects. Like, there are problems, but a lot of it I felt was just insanely worth watching, and I could see myself rewatching it. This is so dated. It does not hold up. I can't even imagine back then it was very memorable. Like, I don't think it did gangbusters. And I really wish I was able to find the other TV movie, because it at least had Steve from Full House, the guy who plays Aladdin in Aladdin. You know, like, it has actual people who are actors who you might recognize. And so I thought, maybe if we found that, it would be better. But here, it just, nothing works.
Yeah, I really do wish we found the 94 version. I actually did find some clips of it on YouTube, and it already looks way better than this movie did. Granted, it's basically a retelling, just with, a more modern cast, but yeah, I do kind of wish that we saw that instead. Because, at least you have, at least you had Scott Weinger, I believe his name is. Because, he's a charming guy. And then you have Ed Begley Jr., who could be entertaining. But, yeah, it's a shame. And I should mention the clip I saw, like, they actually do show the Borgia ring, and it looks completely different. It's like, it has, like, a dragon sticking out of it amongst, like, this big shiny gem. It's like, oh, I like the beetle ring.
So, they retcon the ring in every single one?
Pretty much. And I believe that the way the ring works in this one is the same as it was in the movie we're talking about now, Return of the Shaggy Dog, like, where he reads the incantation and now he's stuck that way until he says it again. I believe that's how it works. I haven't really found anything to indicate otherwise.
I want to throw this out. I want to throw this out there to our listeners. If anybody can can find the 1994 Shaggy Dog remake, the made-for-TV version, if anybody can track that down, please let one of us know and just send it to us, and we'll discuss it in a later episode. If anybody can track it down,
we would be your best friends for life.
I mean, like, the only way that we can possibly find it is if somebody taped it or has, like, a VHS copy of it. But, please, if you can find it, that would be amazing, because I would like to see what they did with the 90s version of the same premise. Because otherwise, the next one that we're going to be talking about is the 2006 Tim Allen Shaggy Dog.
A Shaggy Dog Christmas? What?
Blarg.
I mean, it does have Tim Allen in it, but...
The 2006 Shaggy Dog is infamous. Before I even knew what the Shaggy Dog was, I saw that Disney was putting this out, and it was yet another big Tim Allen film where he was acting stupid, and it didn't look funny, and from what I hear, it's very, very bad. So hopefully it's not as bad as this one. But if you can find the 94 one, I can only imagine something that's heavily of the 90s would be better than something heavily of the 80s. Maybe I'm just biased because I grew up in the 90s, but I don't know. With all of that being said, let's get into final thoughts. And I am going to start with our chart master, Master Eric. What are your final thoughts of this travesty?
It's just very blah. It's like you take something wacky like the Shaggy Dog, and then you just kind of do like nothing. It's like, oh, he transforms into a dog, but then we don't get to see the dog do the crazy antics. Like even in the first Shaggy Dog movie, at least he's doing some zany stuff. At least he's driving he's driving a car, he's driving a roadster, or he's like trying to escape out of a room with like, but he has like trying to climb up a ladder and stuff like that. And in the Shaggy DA, it just goes all out, punching guys and climbing out of windows and going in a roller derby and throwing pies. I mean, they pulled all out. I mean, they could have at least try and do the pie fight again. I mean, they could have done that, but they just, for whatever reason, decided to play more comedy of errors. And while that's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just, well, kind of felt that kind of needed a little bit more. I kind of wished for some of that zany humor back, like some of that slapstick comedy that was in the Shaggy DA. I mean, it can be done even on a lower budget, like a made-for-TV film, but we just got a movie that just kind of drags itself with basically with a lot of the humor just not being funny. It's just a disappointment.
They just didn't care.
All right, now moving on to Kat. What do you think?
I'm gonna do what I tend to do with certain Disney films that either I really don't like or don't fit into my vision of the original film. I'm gonna pretend that it never existed, because quite honestly, if this movie was never made, there would be really nothing different about either the Shaggy Dog or the Shaggy DA, because it's pretty much a useless midquill. It's like, oh, let's show how Wilby, ended up marrying his wife, and and how he was turned into the dog again, and how he ended up with the ring. It's like, okay, well, you definitely have some continuity tying it to the Shaggy DA, but then you kind of go off the rails a bit, and then you leave even more plot holes. That's pretty much what I feel like this film was. It was a plot hole, and it was an unnecessary plot hole, because this film just doesn't need to exist. It adds nothing, and it doesn't really explain anything, because I mean, Wilby may have been left the ring, but it still ends up in the museum by the time we get to Shaggy DA, and we see familiar characters, but some of them we don't see again in the Shaggy DA, so just it's nothing. Like, I don't like this film. I don't think it's well made at all. I think the comedy is actually god awful. Like, the acting is like subpar at best, and it's just an all around disappointment. Like, it's sad because they had the tools to make it good and they didn't. So yeah, I'm just gonna make things easier on myself and just pretend this movie doesn't exist, like most of the Pirates franchise. So, there.
All right. Well, final thoughts on my end. I feel the same exact way. This was painful getting through. Like, I had to work too. So like I couldn't even drink while we were watching the film. That's how bad. Like, I wanted to have like a bottle of booze or something, but nope, I had to work that night, so I had to suffer and then go to work. But it's just, this film is unpleasant. It is not fun to watch as an experience. It is taxing intellectually. If you're talking critically about the film, it doesn't work on so many levels. But just as a means of entertainment, it cannot provide that. There's maybe one or two slight glimmers of what the original stuff was, but after seeing the Shaggy DA, this is clearly the worst film. Without a doubt. Like, the Shaggy Dog may have its problems, but I would take that any day. Any day over this. It's one of those films where I don't think you need to see it. I'm not sure it ranks quite up with our top worst films that we've talked about in the 50s, because we have stuff like Tonka, and we have stuff like Savage Sam, which one of our new viewers actually really, really likes, apparently. But this film, while it's not as bad as some of the bad Disney sequels that we've covered before, it's boring and it has no means to exist. It has no reason why it should have any business existing, and that's its cardinal sin. It shouldn't have been made. It was maybe made for a cheap buck. It does not have any of the charm or passion or spirit as the original two films. And I'm upset knowing that this film exists after the glory that was the Shaggy DA, because we know they can do better. We have seen it. I miss the dog on rollerblades.
Me too, Zen. Me too.
I miss the dog driving the car and it actually being funny.
I miss the dog punching someone. Like,
I could watch that all day.
Well, unfortunately, I don't think things are gonna get any better with the last one. If anything, I feel like they're gonna get worse.
It's probably gonna be like that. And for the record, before we get into Tim Allen, I think Tim Allen is a great actor. But I think two of the problems he's fallen into recently is that it's very hard for him to change his vocal style, if that makes sense. He has this very recognizable voice, and a lot of it tends to feel like the same film as earlier films he's done. And he's just not given that much good material these days. Like back during the first Santa Claus and during his Tim the Toolman Taylor days, like, he was given some good stuff to work with, and he can act. It's just nowadays he's not really given a lot.
Yeah, it's a shame because like he actually is a legit like comedic actor, and I have a feeling that the next movie is just gonna waste him in that. But I guess we'll see next time. Oh Lord, will we see next time?
Oh boy.
All right, guys. Well, we are 3/4 of the way done with our Shaggy Dog marathon. Next time, we conclude with the 2006 Tim Allen Shaggy Dog. Unless someone out there magically finds a copy of the 1994 film, in which case we will immediately jump on a review of that. In any case, guys, thank you so much for watching. I am Zenith Rule.
I'm Kat Macberrie.
I'm Eric Y2 Staller.
And we will see you guys next time, where we will have more charts to try to figure out where this film fits in with the others.
TTFN. Ta-ta for now.
Wait, I have charts! Charts!
Thank you for watching the Media Meltdown. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more awesome videos. And if you like what you see, show your support on the Patreon page at patreon.com/Media Meltdown. See you all next time on the Media Meltdown.
But before we do that, Eric, would you please explain, using charts, when this film takes place?
This is the part where we cut to the footage. Wait.
Yes.
I was ready for you to act it out through your mic. Disappoint me, Eric.
And yet another blooper. Okay.